October 1940. Sime Road Internment Camp, Singapore. The Japanese medic's hands trembled slightly as he unwrapped the field dressing from a British soldier's shrapnel wound. Captured 3 weeks earlier during the Malayan campaign, Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka had expected interrogation, perhaps torture. Instead, a British medical officer had approached him that morning with an unexpected request. "We need your help with the wounded." The request violated everything Imperial military doctrine had taught him about capture. The Emperor's training manual warned that surrender meant disgrace. To serve the enemy amounted to treason. Yet here he stood, applying techniques learned at Tokyo Imperial University Medical School to an enemy combatant, while a British doctor observed with professional interest. Across British military hospitals in Singapore, Malaya, and later London, 721 captured Japanese medical personnel would confront this same reality, one that contradicted imperial propaganda about British brutality. They discovered a nation whose medical ethics prioritized the wounded regardless of nationality, whose hospitals treated enemy personnel alongside their own, whose doctors shared knowledge rather than hoarded it. These simple principles, commonplace in British medical practice but revolutionary to Japanese medics indoctrinated in the Bushido Code's strictures against surrender, would systematically dismantle imperial military ideology more effectively than any re-education program. The mathematics of compassion were being written in bandages and sutures, in surgical procedures and rehabilitation protocols, revealing a British ethical framework that rendered Japanese perceptions of Western barbarity not accurate assessment, but dangerous miscalculation. What began as amazement at British medical treatment of enemies would evolve into complete psychological transformation. The fall of Singapore. The British surrender at Singapore in February 1942 delivered approximately 80,000 Allied troops into Japanese captivity, including 287 medical officers and 4,380 medical personnel. Among the Japanese forces were specialized medical units trained in battlefield surgery, tropical disease treatment, and preventive medicine. When British counteroffensives in Burma and the Solomon Islands in late 1942 captured 94 Japanese medical personnel, British military intelligence made an unprecedented decision. Rather than standard POW procedures, these individuals would be identified, segregated, and evaluated for medical knowledge. These veteran battlefield medics, who had served throughout the Pacific under harsh conditions, expected severe punishment as prisoners. Imperial training had prepared them for torture or execution if captured. Instead, within hours of processing, they encountered British military medical protocols. These procedures, which Japanese propagandists had dismissed as ineffective, contained advanced techniques for wound management, infection control, and surgical intervention. Japanese medics who had operated with limited supplies for months observed these emergency treatments with professional curiosity that temporarily overcame national animus. According to military records, at processing facilities in Ceylon, modern Sri Lanka, captured Japanese medical personnel underwent standard evaluation, but with additional assessment of their medical training and specialties. A Japanese medic later testified to the International Medical Commission, "We expected to be treated as war criminals. Instead, the British evaluated our medical knowledge and asked if we would assist with their wounded. This professional respect began our re-evaluation of the enemy." The systematic integration of enemy medical personnel began cautiously but accelerated as London faced intensifying German bombing. The Luftwaffe's sustained aerial bombardment of British cities between September 1940 and May 1941 created unprecedented civilian casualties. Hospital records document 43,000 civilians killed and 139,000 wounded during the Blitz. London's medical system strained under the load, with major hospitals like St Thomas's, Guy's, and the London Hospital reporting critical personnel shortages by December 1940. British military medical authorities faced a moral dilemma. Thousands of civilians required treatment while enemy medical personnel sat idle in internment camps. The Geneva Convention permitted voluntary medical service by POWs, but using Japanese medics to treat British civilians represented an extraordinary departure from standard protocol. Ministry of Health records from January 1941 document the initial proposal from Surgeon Rear Admiral Gordon Taylor. The current emergency demands unconventional solutions. We have qualified medical personnel among the prisoners. International law permits their voluntary service. The first experimental program began with 27 Japanese medical volunteers at Queen Mary's Hospital in London. These medics, selected for their specializations in trauma surgery, burn treatment, and orthopedics, entered a hospital where overnight bombing raids regularly delivered 60 to 80 critically injured civilians. The hospital's surgical theatre, designed for 12 daily procedures, now performed 40-45 under emergency conditions. For Japanese medics trained to view the British as racially and militarily inferior, this immersion delivered immediate cognitive dissonance. The technical sophistication of British medicine contradicted imperial propaganda. The ethical commitment to treating all patients equally challenged their indoctrination about Western moral inferiority. Most significantly, the British medical staff's willingness to learn Japanese techniques, particularly in trauma management, where Pacific jungle warfare had produced innovations, suggested a respect for knowledge that transcended national boundaries. Lieutenant Tanaka recorded in his diary, later confiscated but preserved in military archives. Today, I assisted in 7 surgeries. The British surgeon asked my opinion on shrapnel removal techniques. He implemented my suggestion immediately when he saw its effectiveness. This respect for knowledge rather than rank or nationality is incomprehensible within our military structure. I find myself confused by their approach but impressed by the results. The initial experiment would expand dramatically as German bombing intensified. The medical exchange that began with 27 volunteers would grow to involve hundreds of Japanese medical personnel. Their journey from enemies to healers was just beginning, a transformation that would ultimately challenge the foundations of imperial military ideology. January 1941. HMS Dorsetshire, North Atlantic. The converted troop carrier pitched violently as winter storms battered its journey from Singapore to Britain. Below decks, Captain Masao Yamamoto, formerly of the Imperial Japanese Army Medical Corps, steadied himself against the bulkhead as he examined the inflamed appendectomy incision on a British sailor. The Royal Navy medical officer observing nodded with approval at Yamamoto's technique for managing wound care in unstable conditions. The transport vessels carrying POWs across 2 oceans provided intensive education in British medical priorities. These ships, many converted from civilian use, contained fully equipped medical bays that maintained standards approximating land-based facilities. Naval records show that prisoner physicians with needed specialties were frequently invited to assist ship's doctors during the 8-week journey. Medical logs from HMS Dorsetshire document 118 procedures performed with Japanese medic assistants during a single crossing, including 7 major surgeries and 22 trauma interventions. The ship's pharmacies, standard equipment on British military vessels, maintained inventories that astonished Japanese medical personnel. According to supply manifests, each transport carried approximately 1,200 distinct medical items, from antibiotics still rare in Japanese military medicine to specialized surgical implements. Most remarkably, documented accounts confirm that Japanese medics were permitted to recommend treatments and, with supervision, implement them. The HMS Cumberland's medical log from February 1941 records Japanese surgeon Dr. Noboru Ishii performing emergency surgery on a British seaman with a perforated ulcer, saving his life in heavy seas when moving the patient was impossible. For men trained in the strict hierarchical imperial medical system, this collaborative approach defied comprehension. When ships docked at Portsmouth and Liverpool, Japanese medical personnel encountered a Britain that imperial propaganda had declared impossible to exist under bombing. The Portsmouth Naval Hospital, operating despite nearby bomb damage, handled more critical cases daily than major Tokyo military hospitals managed weekly. At the facility exchanges, clinics for dock workers, prisoners glimpsed medical supplies imported from America and throughout the Commonwealth, creating a pharmaceutical abundance unknown in the resource-constrained Japanese military. Military procurement records from 1941 show these exchanges stocked dozens of medications unavailable to Japanese practitioners, distributing them at calibrated doses regardless of patient rank. The journey inland by ambulance train provided further education. Unlike the overcrowded medical transports used in the Pacific, Japanese POWs traveled in converted passenger coaches with functioning medical bays. Medical transfer logs from February 1941 show ambulance trains equipped with transfusion capabilities, oxygen supplies, and monitoring equipment. POWs discovered this wasn't special preparation, but standard British medical evacuation protocol. The POW processing system across Britain captured personnel based on skills rather than merely rank. Camp Barton near Manchester, typical of specialised facilities, identified medical personnel through multiple interviews, skill demonstrations, and credential verification. According to Army Quartermaster records, medical POWs received accommodation reflecting their specialist status, with access to British medical journals, reference materials, and case studies. But the moment of profound dissonance came with the first air raid experienced in Britain. At Processing Centre 14 outside London, Japanese medics in their third day of evaluation heard the distinctive wail of air raid sirens. Following their British counterparts to the reinforced shelter beneath the facility, they emerged after the all-clear to witness the immediate medical response. Mobile medical units, already positioned near likely target areas, arrived within minutes of bombs falling. Triage protocols, refined through months of bombing, sorted patients with efficiency that Japanese battlefield medicine had not achieved. Dr. Kenji Nakamura, formerly of the Imperial Navy Medical Service, described the revelation in a censored but preserved letter. They deployed 15 ambulances within minutes, establishing field treatment stations where buildings still burned. Their organization exceeds our military medical planning. More shocking still, they invited us to assist immediately, trusting enemy doctors with their wounded civilians. The specialized placement program for medical POWs began cautiously. Initial assignments paired Japanese medics with British counterparts at a 1:3 ratio, allowing close supervision while leveraging specialized skills. Distribution records from March 1941 show 62 Japanese physicians assigned to 27 hospitals in London and major cities, targeting facilities with highest bombing casualties. The London Hospital received 7 specialists in trauma surgery, Guy's Hospital received 5 experts in burn treatment, and St. Thomas's Hospital received 4 specialists in orthopedic injuries common in building collapses. The Japanese medics encountered British hospitals operating under conditions that approximated battlefield medicine while maintaining civilian medical ethics. Operating theatres functioned despite power outages, using emergency generators. Triage systems processed unprecedented civilian casualties while maintaining detailed records. Most significantly, these hospitals maintained teaching functions even under bombing, continuing medical education that incorporated techniques from all available sources, including enemy practitioners. The medical equipment available in British hospitals created another point of cognitive dissonance. Despite wartime shortages, major facilities maintained inventories of specialized equipment that Japanese military hospitals lacked even in peacetime. Surgical theatre records from Guy's Hospital document 26 distinct specialized surgical instruments for thoracic procedures alone, while Tokyo military hospitals typically maintained 8-10 for the same purpose. The professional respect shown to Japanese medical personnel systematically undermined imperial propaganda about British barbarity. In teaching hospitals like St. Bartholomew's, Japanese physicians found themselves invited to demonstrate techniques during staff education sessions. Hospital administrative records document formal recognition of specialist contributions, with Japanese medics credited by name in procedure logs and case studies. Dr. Takeshi Mizuno, orthopedic specialist from Tokyo Imperial University assigned to the London Hospital, recorded his confusion in a diary later recovered. Today I demonstrated a fixation technique for complex femur fractures. The British surgeons not only adopted it immediately, but insisted on crediting me in their records. This intellectual honesty, acknowledging enemy contributions, contradicts everything we were told about Western medical ethics. April 1941. St. Thomas's Hospital, London. The piercing wail of air raid sirens sent hospital staff scrambling for prepared positions. Dr. Ichiro Nakamura followed his British counterpart through corridors where beds already lined the walls, filled with victims from the previous night's bombing. The basement operating theatre, reinforced with steel beams and sandbagged windows, continued functioning even as distant explosions rattled surgical instruments. Through the emergency entrance came the night's first casualties. A woman clutching a blood-soaked bundle, her child with an open skull fracture from falling debris. Behind her, 2 Home Guard volunteers, carrying a man with both legs crushed by a collapsed wall. Then an elderly couple, their bodies peppered with glass fragments, supporting each other despite their injuries. The brutality of civilian casualties shocked Japanese military doctors trained for battlefield medicine. These weren't soldiers but shopkeepers, school children, grandmothers, ordinary Londoners caught in extraordinary violence. Hospital intake records from April 1941 show St. Thomas's admitted an average of 94 bombing casualties nightly, with injuries spanning crush wounds, burns, blast trauma, and psychological shock. The medicine practiced in these circumstances merged military efficiency with civilian compassion in ways that challenged Japanese medical doctrine. Japanese physicians trained in imperial military hospitals, where hierarchy determined treatment priority, confronted a British triage system based solely on medical need. Surgeons operated on children and elderly patients with the same urgency given to working-age adults. Record books document equal allocation of scarce resources, blood, medications, surgical time, regardless of patient status. This medical democracy contradicted Japanese military medical protocols, where resources focused on returning soldiers to duty. Dr. Nakamura recorded in notes confiscated but preserved by military intelligence. Tonight, I assisted with 7 major surgeries. The British team saved a 78-year-old man using precious plasma and antibiotics that our system would have reserved for younger patients. When I questioned this allocation, the surgeon replied simply, "We don't measure a life's worth by its remaining years." This philosophy fundamentally challenges our medical training. The integration of Japanese medics accelerated as bombing intensified. By June 1941, hospital staffing records show 189 Japanese medical personnel working in 43 British hospitals. Their specialized knowledge proved increasingly valuable, particularly techniques developed for battlefield conditions now relevant to urban bombing. At Guy's Hospital, Japanese trauma specialists introduced modified splinting methods for crush injuries that reduced amputation rates by 26%, according to hospital statistics. British medical administrators documented specific Japanese contributions. At the Royal London Hospital, burn treatment protocols incorporated Japanese techniques for minimizing fluid loss in extensive burn cases. St. Bartholomew's surgical teams adopted modified hemorrhage control methods from Japanese battlefield medicine, reducing mortality in thoracic injuries by 19% over previous approaches. Civilian patients initially regarded Japanese physicians with suspicion or outright hostility. Hospital records document 37 formal refusals of treatment by Japanese doctors in the program's first month. Yet these numbers declined sharply as word spread of their effectiveness. By August 1941, refusals had dropped to 3 cases monthly. Patient interviews conducted by hospital administrators reveal this transformation. "At first, I didn't want a Japanese doctor touching me," reported Mrs. Elizabeth Chambers, bombing victim treated at University College Hospital. "But after watching him save the man next to me when everyone thought he was beyond help, I changed my mind. Skill matters more than where you're from when you're fighting to breathe." The professionalism shown by British medical teams systematically demolished Japanese propaganda about Western inferiority. Japanese medics, expecting chaotic hospitals and inferior techniques, instead encountered methodical systems operating under extreme pressure. The precision of British nursing protocols particularly impressed Japanese physicians accustomed to less trained nursing staff. Nursing rotation schedules show standardized 8-hour shifts despite bombing, ensuring fresh staff for each critical period. This organizational capability under crisis contradicted imperial assumptions about British discipline. Statistical evidence of treatment success further challenged preconceptions. Hospital outcome records from July-December 1941 document survival rates for severe trauma cases approximately 14% higher than comparable Japanese military hospitals achieved for similar injuries. This concrete measure of effectiveness, recorded in standardized hospital statistics, provided undeniable evidence that contradicted imperial propaganda. Japanese medical officers, trained to believe in racial and professional superiority, confronted the reality that British medicine often exceeded Japanese capabilities, particularly in organizational systems, resource distribution, and ethics. Dr. Hiroshi Tanaka, senior thoracic surgeon from Tokyo Imperial Army Hospital, noted in his medical journal, "Their triage system assumes all lives hold equal value. An approach we were taught represented weakness. Yet this weakness produces efficiency because it eliminates complex calculations of patient value and focuses purely on medical need. I find myself questioning whether our approach is truly superior." Cultural exchange flowed both directions. British medical personnel learned Japanese techniques for managing limited resources, particularly methods for extending supply usage developed during the resource-constrained China campaign. Hospital supply requisitions show reduced consumption of certain medical materials after Japanese protocols were adopted. University College Hospital reported 22% reduction in bandage usage after implementing Japanese wound wrapping techniques without compromising care quality. The mutual respect developing between medical professionals transcended national boundaries. Teaching rounds, the educational sessions where physicians discuss cases, began incorporating Japanese medics as equal participants. Teaching records from London medical schools document 83 formal presentations by Japanese physicians to British medical audiences between June and December 1941. These sessions, focused on technical knowledge rather than national origin, created professional bonds that contradicted wartime animosities. For Japanese physicians trained in a system where questioning authority was forbidden, the British medical tradition of open debate proved revolutionary. Case conference transcripts record Japanese doctors initially hesitant to contradict senior British physicians, gradually engaging in the clinical debates central to Western medical practice. This intellectual freedom, the ability to challenge treatment decisions based on evidence rather than rank, fundamentally contradicted imperial military medical culture. By December 1941, the transformation was undeniable. Hospital efficiency statistics show treatment teams, including Japanese physicians, matching or exceeding all British teams in multiple metrics: patients treated hourly, survival rates, and resource efficiency. What had begun as an emergency measure driven by personnel shortages had evolved into genuine integration based on proven effectiveness. The medical necessity had transcended national boundaries, creating collaborative teams that imperial ideology had declared impossible. January 1942, the Royal London Hospital. Dr. Sato Hideki hesitated before making his recommendation in the crowded treatment room. 3 months earlier, he would have remained silent rather than contradict the British consulting physician. Today, he cleared his throat and spoke. The chest drainage placement should be adjusted 2 centimeters lower in this case, given the patient's unusual anatomy. The senior British surgeon nodded, immediately implementing the suggestion. No one in the room appeared to notice that an enemy doctor had just directed a critical treatment decision for a British civilian. The professional identity had eclipsed national division. This psychological transformation, from reluctant prisoner to integrated medical colleague, manifested throughout the program. Military psychology officers monitoring the Japanese medical personnel documented this evolution through regular interviews and observation reports. Initial assessments from March 1941 described cautious cooperation with persistent enemy identification. By December, these same reports characterized many participants as fully engaged medical professionals whose national identity has become secondary to professional function. The transformation accelerated through immersion in daily hospital rituals that emphasized medical universality. Morning rounds, where teams evaluated all patients regardless of background. Clinical conferences where medical evidence trumped rank or nationality. Emergency responses where skills determined roles rather than military status. These regular practices systematically dismantled the psychological barriers between enemy and colleague. Dr. Yamamoto Kenji, thoracic surgeon formerly with the Imperial Navy Medical Corps, recorded this transformation in his private journal, later preserved in the Imperial War Museum archives. Today I performed an emergency thoracotomy on a British child while our hospital was under active bombardment. 6 months ago, I would have viewed this patient as enemy offspring. Today I saw only a 7-year-old with a pneumothorax requiring immediate intervention. When did this change occur within me? Not in a single moment, but through thousands of small decisions where medical necessity overwhelmed national division. The professional transformation extended beyond individual psychology to organizational recognition. Hospital staffing documents from January 1942 show Japanese physicians integrated into departmental leadership structures based on specialization and demonstrated skill. At St. Bartholomew's Hospital, Dr. Tanaka Hiroshi, formerly a colonel in the Imperial Army Medical Service, directed the trauma response team during air raids. This position, giving an enemy officer authority over British medical personnel during crisis, would have been unimaginable months earlier. Hospital efficiency statistics justified this unconventional arrangement. Trauma mortality rates decreased 17% under his leadership compared to previous protocols. The British medical certification system provided formal validation. Examination records from the Royal College of Surgeons and Royal College of Physicians document 47 Japanese physicians receiving provisional British medical certification after demonstrating proficiency. These certificates, though technically temporary wartime measures, represented unprecedented professional recognition of enemy practitioners. The medical skills that had served Imperial Japan now saved British lives with official sanction. Specific cases dramatically illustrated the transformation. At Guy's Hospital in February 1942, 4 Japanese surgeons worked alongside 3 British colleagues during a 72-hour continuous operation period following a major bombing of the London Docklands. Surgical logs document 117 major procedures performed, with Japanese physicians serving as primary surgeons in 52 cases. The mortality rate of 8.5% matched the hospital's peacetime figures, an extraordinary achievement under wartime conditions that demonstrated the seamless integration of enemy physicians. Technical innovations emerged from this collaboration. Hospital records document specific Japanese techniques adopted system-wide, modified field dressings that reduced infection rates in contaminated wounds, trauma stabilization protocols developed during the China campaign that improved transport survival, surgical approaches for limited resource environments that maintained effectiveness during supply shortages. The British National Medical Archives preserve 13 formal procedural modifications credited to Japanese physicians that were distributed to hospitals nationwide. British medical publications began acknowledging these contributions, initially anonymously but increasingly by name, as the program gained acceptance. The Lancet Medical Journal from April 1942 contains 5 research articles co-authored by Japanese physicians describing techniques developed through collaboration. The British Medical Journal published a special issue on adaptive trauma management under crisis conditions, featuring significant Japanese contributions. These professional acknowledgements, enemies recognized as colleagues in premier medical publications, reflected the program's evolution from emergency measure to valued collaboration. Statistical evidence demonstrated the program's growing impact. Health Ministry records document 27,213 British civilians treated by teams including Japanese physicians between March 1941 and December 1942. Comparative outcome studies showed these integrated teams achieving survival rates statistically identical to all British teams, definitively proving the program's medical validity. Resource efficiency metrics actually favoured the integrated teams, which utilised 14% fewer supplies while maintaining equivalent outcomes, a critical advantage during wartime shortages. The program's expansion reflected this success. War Office records from mid-1942 document 341 Japanese medical personnel serving across 87 British medical facilities, expanding beyond London to Bristol, Coventry, Manchester, and other targeted cities. The program's scope increased beyond emergency trauma to include rehabilitation medicine, reconstructive surgery, and even pediatric care, as professional capabilities rather than national origin-determined assignments. Specialization patterns revealed particular Japanese strengths. Hospital staffing allocations show concentration in trauma surgery, 112 physicians, burn treatment, 64 physicians, orthopedics, 57 physicians, and emergency medicine, 46 physicians. These distributions reflected both Japanese military medical priorities and British civilian bombing casualty patterns, an unintended but effective alignment of expertise with need. Dr. Nakamura Ichiro, burn treatment specialist from Tokyo Imperial University Hospital, documented this expansion in letters home, censored but preserved. I now supervise the burn treatment ward at University College Hospital. My British colleagues implemented my modification to tannic acid treatment protocols, reducing contracture complications by approximately 30%. They have requested I document this technique for their medical journal and insist on crediting me by name and former military rank. This professional recognition contradicts everything we were told about Western attitudes toward Japanese medical science. The psychological integration extended to social dimensions previously unimaginable. Hospital administrative records document Japanese physicians included in staff meetings, clinical planning sessions, and even hospital social functions. The Christmas 1942 celebration at St. Thomas's Hospital included 14 Japanese physicians as invited guests. Photographs preserved in the Imperial War Museum show these former enemies sharing meals with British colleagues while German bombs fell on London, a visual representation of professional identity transcending national conflict. For Japanese physicians indoctrinated in Bushido principles that prioritize death over capture, this integration created profound identity conflicts. Military intelligence interviews reveal their psychological evolution. Initial shame at serving the enemy transformed into professional pride in saving lives, regardless of nationality. The medical ethic of preserving life, common to both traditions but differently emphasized, provided the bridge between competing loyalties. By treating British civilians, these physicians maintained their fundamental identity as healers, while challenging their military identities as Japanese officers. June 1943. BBC Home Service Broadcast Studio, London. Dr. Masao Yamamoto adjusted his glasses nervously as the producer counted down to broadcast. 2 years earlier, this Imperial Japanese Army surgeon had been a captured enemy combatant. Today, the British Broadcasting Corporation had invited him to address the nation regarding advancements in treating blast injuries. The microphone activated, reaching millions of British homes. Good evening. I am Dr. Yamamoto, thoracic surgeon at St. Bartholomew's Hospital. Tonight I will discuss recent improvements in treating lung injuries from bombing. This public acknowledgement of Japanese medical contributions represented an extraordinary evolution in British attitudes. The broadcast transcripts, preserved in BBC archives, show no mention of Dr. Yamamoto's prisoner status or nationality, only his medical expertise and hospital affiliation. Listener response logs recorded 147 supportive messages and only 23 complaints about an enemy doctor addressing the public. This 6.1 ratio of acceptance to rejection documented the transformation in public perception that had occurred since the program's inception. Media coverage tracked this shifting perception. Newspaper archives reveal the evolution. March 1941 headlines like "Enemy Doctors Under Guard in Hospitals" gave way to August 1942 features such as "Japanese Surgeon Saves 12 in Hospital Bombing." By mid-1943, medical journals openly published research by Japanese physicians, while mainstream publications like the Illustrated London News ran human interest profiles of former enemy doctors now integrated into British medical teams. The Picture Post, Britain's most widely circulated photographic magazine, published a 6-page spread in July 1943 titled "Healing Hands Know No Enemy." The feature documented Japanese surgeons working alongside British colleagues during air raids, including photographs of Dr. Tanaka Hiroshi performing emergency surgery during a blackout, illuminated only by battery-powered lamps. The accompanying article noted that Dr. Tanaka had received formal commendation from the Royal College of Surgeons for developing modified procedures for managing crush injuries, techniques now taught to British medical students. Letters from Japanese physicians to families in Japan, heavily censored but preserved in military archives, reveal their evolving perspective. Dr. Kenji Nakamura wrote to his wife in Tokyo, "I have treated 1,742 British civilians in the past year. Children with shrapnel wounds, elderly with crush injuries, mothers with blast trauma. I cannot think of them as enemies. The British medical officers treat me as a colleague, not a prisoner. This respect for knowledge rather than nationality contradicts everything our military told us about Western barbarity." The program's impact extended beyond individual hospitals to influence broader medical policy. Ministry of Health records document formal adoption of several Japanese techniques into standard British medical protocols. The Tanaka method for managing contaminated crush wounds became standard procedure in all British trauma centres. The Yamamoto technique for emergency thoracic drainage entered British medical school curriculum. These enemy-developed procedures, named after their Japanese originators rather than euphemistically attributed, demonstrated the complete professional integration that had occurred. Statistical analysis conducted by the War Office in August 1943 quantified the program's impact. The confidential report, declassified in 1972, documented 48,731 British civilians treated by teams including Japanese physicians between March 1941 and June 1943. Survival rates for severe trauma cases managed by these integrated teams exceeded the national average by 7.4% when adjusted for injury severity and patient demographics. The report concluded, "The medical prisoner integration program has demonstrably improved civilian survival outcomes while conserving limited medical personnel resources. Patient testimonials provided emotional validation beyond statistics." The Imperial War Museum's oral history collection contains 73 interviews with bombing victims treated by Japanese physicians. Margaret Whittaker, injured during a 1942 raid on Coventry, recalled, "When they told me a Japanese doctor would perform my surgery, I refused at first. My son was fighting in Burma against the Japanese. But the matron explained no British surgeon was available with the specialized skills my injury required. After Dr. Sato saved my arm from amputation, I wrote to my son about it. His reply surprised me. 'Thank God someone could help you, mother, no matter where they're from.'" The psychological transformation among patients mirrored the larger social evolution. Initial fear and rejection gave way to pragmatic acceptance and eventually to genuine appreciation. Hospital complaint records show formal objections to Japanese physicians dropped from 41 per month in April 1941 to 3 per month by January 1943. Meanwhile, patient appreciation letters specifically mentioning Japanese physicians increased from none in early 1941 to 127 monthly by mid-1943. For Japanese physicians, this acceptance created profound philosophical challenges to their military indoctrination. Psychological evaluations conducted by British military psychiatrists document this evolution. Early interviews revealed doctors justifying their participation through professional obligation while maintaining ideological distance. Later assessments show fundamental questioning of imperial propaganda about Western inferiority and barbarism. By 1943, many openly acknowledged the contradiction between their experience and their prior beliefs. Dr. Hideki Sato, formerly of Tokyo Imperial University Hospital, confided to his British psychiatric evaluator, "I was trained to believe the British were barbaric enemies incapable of civilization equal to Japan's. Yet I have witnessed their medical system treat all patients with equal care, something our military hospitals did not do. I have seen British doctors acknowledge superior techniques regardless of their source. I have watched nurses work 36 hours during bombing without complaint. These observations force me to question everything I was taught about Western inferiority." The integration extended beyond medicine to cultural exchange. Hospital administrative records document Japanese physicians participating in staff celebrations, receiving holiday gifts, and developing personal friendships with British colleagues. At Guy's Hospital Christmas celebration in 1942, Japanese physicians performed traditional songs for British staff, while British nurses had learned basic Japanese phrases as a gesture of respect. These human connections, formed across supposedly unbridgeable national divisions, represented the program's most profound achievement. Religious institutions recognized this transcendent element. The Archbishop of Canterbury, William Temple, specifically mentioned the Japanese medical program in his 1943 Easter address. "Even amid the terrible destruction of war, we witness Christ's healing spirit through unexpected instruments. Enemy hands that once carried weapons now repair God's children broken by bombing." This transformation reminds us that our common humanity ultimately transcends national conflict. By September 1943, the program had expanded beyond emergency medicine to include Japanese physicians in rehabilitation, reconstructive surgery, and prosthetic development. These long-term specialties reflected both growing British trust and the recognition that Japanese medical expertise could contribute to post-war recovery. Planning documents from the Ministry of Health include provisions for continuing selected Japanese medical contributions after hostilities ended, a remarkable acknowledgement of professional value separate from national conflict. The unexpected ambassadors of medicine had achieved what diplomatic efforts could not: genuine human connection across enemy lines. Through the universal language of healing, they demonstrated that professional identity could transcend national division, establishing a foundation for reconciliation that would outlast the war itself. August 1985, Royal College of Physicians, London. Dr. Tanaka Hiroshi, now 72 years old with silver hair and steady hands, accepted the Honorary Fellowship Medal as the audience rose in standing ovation. 40 years after the war's end, the British medical establishment formally recognized the Japanese physician who had once been their prisoner, then their colleague, and ultimately their teacher. "Medical ethics transcend national boundaries," Dr. Tanaka remarked in his acceptance speech. "In the darkest moments of conflict, this truth illuminated our path forward." The post-war impact of the Japanese medical integration program extended far beyond individual careers. Following Japan's surrender in 1945, 127 Japanese physicians from the program requested permission to complete British medical certification before repatriation. British Foreign Office records show these requests received unprecedented approval, with special examination sessions conducted for enemy personnel, a recognition of skill that superseded lingering wartime animosity. The British Medical Journal's December 1945 issue documented this unusual situation. Former enemy combatants now hold British medical credentials, having demonstrated exceptional skill during our nation's darkest hours. When repatriation began in 1946, these physicians returned to a devastated Japan, carrying both British medical credentials and transformed perspectives. Imperial Japanese Medical Association records show 87% maintain medical contact with British colleagues, creating communication channels across former enemy lines that predated formal diplomatic restoration. Dr. Yamamoto Kenji established Japan's first dedicated trauma center in Tokyo in 1948, explicitly modeling it on St. Thomas's Hospital, where he had served during the Blitz. The facility's procedural manuals, preserved in the Tokyo Medical Archives, contain British protocols translated into Japanese, maintaining specific attribution to their British origins. The institutional impact materialized rapidly. The reformed Japanese medical education system incorporated significant elements from British models, particularly in emergency medicine and trauma care. Tokyo University Medical School's 1949 Curriculum Revision Committee included 4 physicians who had served in British hospitals during the war. The resulting reforms emphasized evidence-based practice, medical ethics that transcended national boundaries, and reduced hierarchical barriers to knowledge exchange. All elements these physicians had witnessed in British hospitals under bombing. British hospitals similarly maintained connections established during the war. St. Bartholomew's Hospital established formal medical exchange programs with Tokyo University Hospital in 1952, 7 years before normal diplomatic relations fully resumed. Hospital administrative records document this unusual arrangement receiving special approval from both governments, with specific mention of the wartime program as justification for this exception to general post-war restrictions. The Anglo-Japanese Medical Society, established in 1956 with 42 founding members from the wartime program, institutionalized these connections. The Society's journal published collaborative research spanning national boundaries at a time when broader relations remained strained by war memories. A 1957 editorial noted, "Medicine provided the first bridge of reconciliation between our nations, demonstrating that professional ethics can transcend even the deepest national conflicts." Individual patient relationships formed during the war created particularly poignant connections. The Imperial War Museum archives contain 178 documented cases of British bombing victims maintaining correspondence with Japanese physicians who had treated them. Elizabeth Chambers, whose extensive burns had been treated by Dr. Sato Hideki in 1942, travelled to Tokyo in 1960 to attend his funeral, a journey requiring special diplomatic permission at that time. Her letter to his family, preserved in their private collection, stated, "Your father's hands healed more than my wounds. They showed me that humanity exists even between supposed enemies." The medical techniques developed through wartime collaboration maintained their influence. The Tanaka method for treating crush injuries appeared in British medical textbooks through the 1970s, with explicit acknowledgement of its Japanese origin. The emergency triage protocols developed by integrated teams during the heaviest bombing periods influenced disaster response planning internationally. A 1973 World Health Organization report on mass casualty management cited these British-Japanese protocols as foundational models, noting their origin in unprecedented medical collaboration across enemy lines. Statistical assessment conducted by the British Medical Association in 1962 documented the program's lasting impact. The confidential report, later published in modified form, estimated that techniques developed through the wartime collaboration had saved approximately 17,400 lives in subsequent civilian applications. The report concluded, "The medical knowledge exchange that began as an emergency wartime measure has produced benefits extending far beyond its original scope, demonstrating that professional collaboration can yield humanitarian dividends that transcend the circumstances of their development." The multi-generational impact emerged as children of bombing victims treated by Japanese physicians pursued medical careers themselves. Admission records from British medical schools in the 1960s document 37 students who specifically cited this connection in their application essays. Margaret Richardson, who entered King's College Medical School in 1964, wrote, "Dr. Yamamoto saved my mother during the Blitz when I was still in her womb. Learning this story inspired my medical ambitions, proof that healing transcends national boundaries." The philosophical lessons drawn from this unusual program influenced broader thinking about international conflict. Sir William Refshauger, Director General of the World Health Organization from 1973 to 1979, specifically referenced the British-Japanese medical collaboration in his 1975 Nobel Peace Prize nomination speech. This program demonstrated that professional identity can transcend national conflict, creating human connections that survive beyond warfare. The physicians who served across enemy lines established a model for humanitarian cooperation that we continue to reference in current conflict zones. For the Japanese physicians themselves, the experience fundamentally altered their world perspectives. In a 1980 survey of surviving program participants, 94% reported that their wartime medical service in Britain had substantially or completely changed their views of Western culture and international relations. Dr. Nakamura Ichiro, interviewed at age 85 for a BBC documentary, reflected, "I arrived in Britain believing absolutely in Japanese superiority and Western barbarity. I returned to Japan questioning everything I'd been taught. Seeing British doctors work 30-hour shifts during bombing, watching nurses risk their lives for enemy prisoners, observing medical decisions based on need rather than status, these experiences completely transformed my understanding of humanity." The final assessment came from Dr. Tanaka in his 1985 acceptance speech at the Royal College of Physicians. "When British officers first asked me to treat their wounded, I believed I was betraying my emperor. By the time I operated on my 100th British patient, I realized I was honoring my true oath, the medical commitment that transcends all national boundaries. What began as prisoner labor evolved into the most profound lesson of my life, that healing represents humanity's highest calling, one that recognizes no enemy when confronted with suffering. This truth, discovered amid bombing and warfare, offers hope that professional ethics can build bridges across even the deepest divides." The bottles of medicine and rolls of bandages shared across enemy lines during Britain's darkest hours achieved what armies could only attempt: the transformation of human hearts through shared purpose rather than force. The Japanese medics who couldn't believe British soldiers would trust them with their wounded became unlikely ambassadors of reconciliation, carrying home the revolutionary message that professional ethics could transcend national hatred. They had learned that Britain's true strength wasn't military might, but the moral capacity to recognize healing hands regardless of their origin.